They will be met with fire and fury.
Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself.
He really has been very open and I think very honorable.
I really think he wants to do something and bring that country into the real world.
It's long been an on-off relationship, but now the talks are off. Right now, it's hard to know if the game is over or indeed who's winning. President Trump is once again, though, talking tough.
And our military, which is by far the most powerful anywhere in the world, that has been greatly enhanced recently, as you all know, is ready if necessary.
But does his more capricious style of diplomacy now leave the world at a higher risk of a full nuclear conflagration? Well, with me now from Florida is political strategist and Trump supporter Mica Mosbacher. Mica's on the Trump 2020 National Advisory Board. And from Washington is Jared Blanc, who's a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. A very good evening to you. Mica, can I start just a brief comment on the letter itself, this vehicle for delivering the message. What did you make of it? I mean, bits of it, strangely, were quite ungrammatical even.
Well, it's very interesting. First of all, it's striking that he released this letter to the media. President Trump is showing transparency in this process. But secondly, this is not quintessentially Trump. First of all, the letter is very conciliatory in tone. It is artfully crafted. And notice that he did not hurl his usual...
Oh, we seem to be having problems with that line to Florida. We'll go to Jared. Jared, I wonder if I can ask you the same question. What you made of the letter?
Well, it's a very peculiar letter. As you reported at the top, there seem to be some almost romantic undertones to it. But at the same time, there's a repetition of his threat of a global thermonuclear war. So I'm not sure that conciliatory is exactly the phrase I would use to describe it.
Yeah. Let's look back at how Trump has handled this. I mean, firstly, do you think he should have called these talks off? I think you never really thought they should have started, but presumably you think the talks should have been called off.
So I think credit where credit's due. It was the right decision to call off these talks, and it was good that President Trump was able to divest himself sufficiently from the process to do so. The problem here is not the decision not to proceed with poorly prepared talks where the parties were not on the same page in terms of the outcome. The problem was the way the talks were decided upon and rolled out to begin with.
Mica, we've got you back, and we were just mid-sentence. You were telling us about this letter. You thought it was conciliatory. I can report to you that Jared didn't think it was that conciliatory because it did have that nuclear threat in it. But look, let's move on. You were a supporter of these talks happening. Are you a supporter of now the abandoning of them?
Well, absolutely. Notice that the talks had stalled out prior to the comment that Vice President Pence had made, of which the senior North Korean official reacted very strongly against. You'll recall he discussed comparing North Korea to Libya, and what he was referring to was the fact that in 1986, there was certainly an isolationist approach. The Libyans managed to isolate themselves both from the UK and the United States. And then under Gaddafi, there was civil unrest requiring NATO come in and intervene militarily. So Trump is coming from a position of strength. This art of the deal president understands that the only way to deal with an enemy is to not back down. I personally think that these talks will carry on. I think that this is a temporary postponement, not a permanent cancellation. And also, Secretary of State Pompeo said today when he was testifying on Congressional Hill that they had been ready, able, and willing to go forward with these talks, but the North Koreans were not cooperating in terms of certain information that they were requesting. So President Trump at this point felt like he needed to exert his leverage to send a clear message to North Korea. Look, the door's open, but we need an attitude adjustment, if you will, if we're going to reset and carry forth with these talks.
Jared, Mica's made a good attempt to kind of rationalise a process from the beginning through to where we are now. I know you don't believe that the process has been nearly as rationally managed and rationally conducted, but I wonder if you can see any credit in a slightly capricious almost unnerving behaviour by President Trump. I mean, does that have the possibility of extracting gains from time to time, like the release of 3 hostages, for example?
Well, bluntly, I think no, that capricious behavior from the President of the United States has no advantage. Look, I praise absolutely this administration's ability to get the 3 hostages out. I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of criticizing the release of Americans the way the other party did when we got Sergeant Bergdahl out. But let's remember that this is a North Korean tactic. They took 3 hostages, they released 3 hostages. This is not the end of that game, I'm certain, for North Korea.
Can I ask you, Jarrett, whether you think there's any harm that has been done? Harm that has been done. Something that is actually the whole process of saying we'll have talks and then abandoning them. Are we back to square one? Are we back to the beginning, or are we somewhere worse than we were 3 months ago?
Well, the situation is very different. It's different in the sense that 3 months ago, Kim was totally isolated. He couldn't even get a meeting with the Chinese. Now he's been to China twice, he's had a meeting with the South Koreans, he's going to have a meeting with the Russians. I think it's pretty clear that the Chinese have led up the economic pressure and that that's not going to change as a result of the US canceling the summit. So Kim right now has got his arsenal and he's repaired some of his ties to his patrons. So that leaves the United States in a weaker position. On the other hand, I would say there is the possibility here that Kim could play this smart. Maintain the moratorium on testing of both ballistic missiles and explosive devices that he's had for the last few months. Try to expand those relationships with China, and then just reduce the temperature that maybe draws the attention of Washington away that would be good for all of us.
But you're describing a huge victory for Kim out of the whole process there. I mean, Mica, that is a credible description of what has happened, isn't it? You're shaking your head.
No, well, first of all, look at what has happened during the last 3 administrations when we have basically appeased Kim Jong-un. Notice that there have been no nuclear tests since September 2017. That's progress right there. Secondly, President Trump has allocated $700 billion to enhance the military. We have 26,000 troops on the ground. Military exercises are going to go forward. McMaster has stated that we definitely have a military option. I go back to the letter. It was very carefully crafted in such a way that it showed sensitivity and tone. And I don't know if my line cut out when I made the point that he did not hurl insults at Kim Jong-un.
No,
I think that we have made tremendous progress just coming to the table to negotiate. And I will say once again, we have an expression in Texas: don't mess with Texas and don't mess with President Trump.
Well, I mean, don't mess with Trump. Jarrett Blanc, last question. Is the world closer to what one might call an accidental conflagration in which somebody, I mean, I suppose this might be the cost of a more kind of capricious diplomacy, that accidents may be more likely to happen. Is that correct, Jarrett?
Just one thing to say quickly is that I think the reason that Kim stopped testing is that he successfully tested a thermonuclear device and didn't need to do much more. I think in answer to your question, right now the world is in Kim's hands, and that's not a very comfortable place to be. He can lower the temperature or he can raise the temperature. I would certainly prefer not to have ceded the initiative to him.
Mica Mosbacher, Jarrett Blanc, thank you both very much indeed.